Can we start? Okay. Good morning. My name is Danny Bennett, and I'm working for a small company called Basiscom out of Germany. I'm native Californian, but I've been in Germany for a couple of years. Been in Europe for about 12, 14 years previously working with Nokia. You might have, if you know me, you might know me from the N9 project in Nokia and the N900. So I worked with MeeGo and MIMO quite a long time. So I was one of the architects. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about a couple of projects, basically some things I'm working on with customers, and give some feedback of some of the findings we have ran into in the team, and some ideas, and just get an idea and share some information with the community about things we're working on, and mainly around HTML5, since it seems to be the key hot topic word in the industry, at least in some of the circles I'm in. And we're going to talk about a project called PlasmaActive, which is an open source project you might be familiar with. Just recently there was an announcement around PlasmaActive, a tablet called Spark, a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but that's running PlasmaActive. So PlasmaActive is basically something from the KDE project. I'll give a little bit more information about that as we move forward. So basically, what am I going to talk about? Something about WAC. If you're familiar with WAC, we're talking about WAC because we're trying to work with this WAC specification for HTML5 based applications. We'll talk a little bit about HTML5 itself, what's so special about it. Not really getting into any details here. This is very high level overview of everything. I'll talk a little bit about PlasmaActive, talk about the projects that we were working on, what we were trying to achieve and our goals, and what we did and what we found. Talk about why you might be interested in such a project and some of the things we were doing. And then get into some of the things about how the community itself is moving in this direction and what other projects we worked with. This project we're working with Mer. Mer is quite close to what we're working on. We work a little bit with Yocto. So there's quite a few open source projects we worked on to do what we're doing. So anyway, and I'll just kind of wrap up with some of the conclusions and some things and get some ideas. Maybe if you guys have some questions, you can help us, point us in the right direction, give us some pointers, and you know, that's all this is, just sharing some information. So what is WAC? Well, WAC is this idea of having this standard set of APIs to be able to port applications between different runtimes, in this case HTML runtimes, and precisely HTML5. Right now it's in its conception phase, I would still say. Samsung and LG have released some products based around it. Some of the work we're doing are working with those two, related to the WAC version 2 spec. But basically, it's just an idea of having a common specification to share applets across different manufacturers. So you could have a WAC application that you have you download on your Android phone, and you can download the same app and it runs on an iPhone or any other WAC compatible device. I'm not that Apple or iPhones currently support WAC. I know Google does plan to support, and some of the other vendors, but that's kind of the idea behind it. But we'll see that this is not exactly as rosy a picture as the manufacturers like to say. There's still a lot of things that need to be done, a lot of stuff missing in this area to actually achieve the goal of a seamless portability that they're thinking of. So HTML5, well, everyone seems to make a big deal about HTML5 like it's the newest, greatest thing in the world, and it's just a new version release of HTML spec. Of course, they are the interesting things that people are excited about, the video tags and some of the better WebGL, OpenGL support, and of course the improvements in the CSS and things like this. But in general, it's still HTML. There's no black magic here. It's just HTML. It's not going to save the world. But it's interesting because the concept and the way they've cleaned up the spec and how it's being adopted and supported by the industry I think that's what makes it quite interesting, because the support from various manufacturers for HTML5 seems to be the real appeal of it. It's not the technical strengths or aspect. I think it still has quite a lot of issues and challenges if you're developing based on HTML5 only applications. And we found out some of the areas that there are certain things that it's just not the nicest environment to develop on. But JavaScript is better than it used to be from when I've been in the industry for years, and JavaScript has come a long way, but it's still something you have to pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, PlasmaActive. So I'm not sure, is anybody here familiar with PlasmaActive at all? Oh, 2 people. Oh, you even have it running on tablet. Actually, I apologize because for the Embedded Linux conference, I had the same conference in Europe. I had a few tablets that I was showing that people could take a look at. Unfortunately, I didn't bring any tablets this time, so I have no tablets to show. People want to see it on Apple. Okay, well, you heard the man. There's a PlasmaActive running here. Go ahead and talk to him about getting a demo. But PlasmaActive, it's a pure open source project. It is basically was created by some of the guys from KDE, my company, Basiscom, and just a concept kind of showcase of what to do if we're trying to move the KDE platform to a mobile device. And so they start trying to figure out what the UI would be, and it turned out to be this kind of fluent based on activities and context with the shared data model across the different activities. And it's still very much under development. I did mention that there is a product now coming out that's based on it, the Spark. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about the Spark project. Although Aaron is running it and we work together, that project is purely under his control, and I don't know very much about it, but I know that it's supposed to be out soon. PlasmaActive itself is fairly lightweight. It's still a lot bigger than I would like. There's quite a few leftover KDE packages that we don't necessarily need, that still need to be cleaned up a little bit. There's always the push, and what we actually did and found out is that it's based on Qt 4.7. It's now been ported to 4.8. But some of the things that we really want to do around HTML5, we have to wait for the WebKit 2 to be integrated, and that's not going to be integrated until Qt 5. So right now, we basically found a lot of good and bad things for using this at the moment, but basically, we would really need a newer version of PlasmaActive that's running on either Qt 5 or at least some form or fork of WebKit 2, so we can get a little bit performance improvements and some better process modeling. So, what is this all about? Well, I kind of already gave you an idea. It's just basically an idea that someone had to have a Linux SDK for Android, Android-like SDK that you could use for open source platforms like tablets, for media centers, mobie devices, handhelds. And this is where it kind of started. And I guess the idea was somebody had the idea, the old heyday of Linux on the desktop with all the distros, you being able to just install Linux on any PC compatible device. I guess this is the same idea, to start to try to find a common platform with a common development environment that runs on a variety of ARM-based hardware and even Intel-based hardware. So we basically did this on ARM and Intel Atom, and some different ARM chips. The other idea behind this is just that we ourselves as a company wanted to find out what you can do with HTML5 as far as embedding it, and what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and then we also had to look in, because of our customer, about WAC and seeing how useful WAC is as far as moving forward on a real device and a production device. And then of course we were playing with something called Qt Quick. I don't know if you're familiar with QML, Qt Quick. It's a descriptive language that Qt has released about 2 years ago, I guess it was. And trying to build nice UI interfaces with that. And that's basically it. So, sorry. So, who really cares? Well, I don't know if anybody really cares outside of myself and the company, but some people might be interested about this. A lot of the work we're doing is it's getting an idea about using HTML5 to actually build real applications as far as using some of the WAC compliant APIs for the store access, trying to access system APIs and how you actually create your system APIs using JavaScript and how to implement. So these are the things that we are doing and sharing this information on the wiki site and web pages. The people who are actually interested in the actual outcome of our work, of course, have been OEMs. They're the main driver in paying the bills for most of this. And of course, the community is very interested. They would really like to have this open source available platform to build and test that runs on quite a different variety of hardware. So this is kind of where all of this is going and where it might be useful from your point of view. So what do we do? Well, I kind of mentioned some of it, what we've already done. We basically this project was started on PlasmaActive. I guess it was on the MeeGo conference in 2010 was the first time they showed this concept. And they used a Intel Atom-based tablet called a WeTab, which was fine for the beginning phases, but as we progressed, we found that it was really too slow. It just doesn't have the power to actually do anything that we really needed to get done. So we've slowly started migrating to ARM-based tablets, and actually the one that works the best is the Archos 10.1G9, and that one is quite sweet. The only thing is we still have some rendering issues with the GL drivers, but other than that, it's actually pretty decent. There's also another ARM-based hardware we had, which is a Vega hardware as well. So, and then we had it running on some Panda boards and MeeGo boards as well inside for doing some development. So, and yeah, so that was basically how we started. And most of that work was getting PlasmaActive stable, then started to work with the WAC website, the WAC.net, and the WAC community to get the sample WAC applets to run on PlasmaActive, seeing what it took to get them compliant. Unfortunately, we can't get them completely compliant because there are some issues with WebKit 1, because it's not completely 100% HTML5 compatible, so we have some issues there, but I can't remember off the top of my head what they were. The operating system we used in the beginning was MeeGo 1.2, and we've slowly been porting to the latest version of Mer. So we're using Mer weekly builds to actually use as a base platform to run PlasmaActive on top of. And then the WAC widgets we're using are WAC 2.0, taken straight from the WAC website. The PlasmaActive version we're using is the latest one, which is the PlasmaActive 2. It's still very much a beta version. I mean, there's still instability there, but it's almost usable. I wouldn't say it's completely usable, but it's almost usable. And then we have another side project called WebRTC, which is a project that was started by Google, I guess, and it's part of this new W3C standard for real-time communication. And we actually have a project that we are ported the WebRTC backends into the PlasmaActive, so you can have a HTML5 real-time communication client on a tablet, and that's another project. But I don't get into that too much. You can get more information on the website. But that's all these things are kind of rolled in together, and that's the only reason I brought it up. So this is for you who've never seen it. This is what PlasmaActive looks like on a tablet. All those applications you see there are downloadable sample applications from the WAC website. They are running just without any modifications. Just download, install, and fire them up. There's just nothing very fancy. There's a to-do list, tic-tac-toe. I think we even have one WebGL-based app. It's not here. It's like a lens flare. Shows some lens flaring and things like this. But these were just taken straight from the WAC compliant site sample and just installed on PlasmaActive, and they run pretty fine. So yeah, this I would say in general, you can actually put quite a few different types of widgets on the PlasmaActive desktop, but HTML5 actually works pretty well. It works pretty well. But the biggest limitation is that PlasmaActive is based on WebKit 1 instead of WebKit 2. So I think that's where most of our issues are, and a lot of it is performance issues. So again, why would you care? Well, WAC, it was at the time we did this. This was just before they released the API for the WAC store, the WAC purchasing API and billing API, and so the WAC spec was missing quite a lot. And in general, if you're using WAC compliant applications and you wanted to build an application and you have something like, for example, a geolocation, address books, things like this, you had some of the APIs well defined, so you should be able to move between platforms and have access to the address book. But in a lot of cases, they were missing some of the system API support. So you have a very limited set of WAC compliant apps that you could actually build because there's not a lot of the back end has been integrated yet. So it's not quite ready for prime time, but it's coming. If you're familiar with anything like PhoneGap, then you would get an idea of what direction they seem to be going in. And it's a pretty sound architecture if they really move in that direction. The HTML5 spec, yeah, everybody talks about HTML5. We ourselves, in this project, we only focused on a few areas, mainly the audio, video tags, and a little bit of the OpenGL interface, WebGL stuff. But if you're really talking about HTML5 and you're saying you're HTML5 compliant, I mean, that's a big chunk of information to say you're compliant. And I'm not sure if saying HTML5 alone is really what we should be saying as far as specification, adhering to a specification. I think we should elaborate a little bit on this and say HTML5 video or HTML5 real-time communication or something like this, because I'm not really sure that most environments are really truly HTML5 compliant. I mean, at least this is our finding, at least when it comes to WebKits. And all WebKits, even though you have an Apple WebKit, the project that you get from the trunk off of webkit.org, yeah, when you go ahead and start adding your UI toolkit on top of that, most of the vendors add patches. So there are different versions in theory, even though you're all based on the same core WebKit. The WebKit behaves and supports slightly different features that the Chromium one does from Google, that Apple has in Safari, that Nokia has as far as their WebKit, and same with GNOME and GTK. So, you know, that's another thing we ran into, that some of the problems going across the different WebKits caused us issues, and it has nothing to do with HTML5 spec. It's just the inherent problems that are in WebKits. So, conclusion. How much time? I'm flying through this. Okay. Conclusion. Well, one thing is we don't recommend, and we won't. We basically dropped all work on the WebKit 1 because it's just there's just too much missing, too much overhead and work that needs to be done to get it to be compatible. So we're moving on to WebKit 2 base. We're also moving on, even though it's not mentioned here, I've been talking to a few people around about Gecko, and now I was actually approached by someone to talk about Gecko, boot to Gecko as a possibility to move forward, because we're trying to focus on environments that are WebRTC compliant, W3C WebRTC compliant environments, which WebKit 2 will be, and it looks like boot to Gecko and the Gecko engine will be as well. So that's probably where we move next. As far as Qt Quick and QML, well, even though they're both, Qt Quick uses a lot of JavaScript in the language, in the QML language, and it's not really HTML5, so there are issues. I think that most of the problems are just are superficial. There's no real compatibility problems. There's a little bit of extra implementation code you have to do, but as far as using the JavaScript engine for doing your QML widgets or your HTML5 widgets, there's not a big problem. We probably are going to be working again with the Qt 5 when they have the Qt Quick 2, so that'll probably be the next thing we do around Qt Quick. Performance on the Qt Quick was on par with HTML5, a little slower on some of the redraws, and and frame rates. But in general, I would say Qt Quick isn't a bad choice. As far as hardware, on almost all the hardware, we didn't have proper hardware acceleration support. The drivers just didn't work or were missing completely depending on the hardware. So we were always CPU bound. So most of our rendering, we were just hitting the CPU. So it wasn't a very nice experience in some cases. So that's another thing that we need to look into, getting better driver support on the tablets that we were using. But I think that's actually been solved. I think this is kind of old information because these are things that we did late last year around August to September. PlasmaActive performance, yeah, that's a problem. Like I mentioned earlier, the KDE, it's just not optimized. There's a lot of leftover baggage in PlasmaActive that needs to get removed. It just needs to be refactored, in my opinion. But it's not an easy thing to do because it's a community project. So you know how it is to work with the community. So. Well, I kind of already went over this, what's next. Like I said, faster hardware, optimized PlasmaActive, better support for HTML5 features, WAC store support. You know, these are basically, this slide is exactly the area that we were mentioning earlier. The WebRTC APIs and WAC, that's an interesting one because at the moment, WebRTC is being developed, the specification, and not really clear when W3C is going to actually have a final version. Google is pushing to have WebRTC integrated in WebKit by the end of the first half of this year. And I would say that Gecko and Mozilla is not far behind probably in their implementation. So it would be interesting to see how the APIs that they define in the specification get rolled into WAC because at some point, you're going to want to have a WAC application that you can use real-time communication and on one platform, and then be able to use it on another platform. Which, since this is all rolled into the back end of the rendering engine, you know, we really would need to have the support integrated and standardized. So we'll see how that goes. And then, of course, Qt 5. But yeah, that's a whole nother issue by itself. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I got. I didn't really have very much. I think not having the prototypes kind of took a lot of my time out of, that was only like a 30 minutes, 20-minute talk. And, but if you guys have any questions about anything that I was talking about, I can try to answer whatever I can. We are looking for help on all this. Like I said, this is kind of a learning experience for us, and we are sharing all the information of our findings. But we think that it's quite important that we all understand how HTML5 is being supported and being used and how we can improve it and getting the feedback to some of these manufacturers who plan on using that for some of the mobile devices and embedded devices. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Go ahead.
You're building HTML5 platform, basically, and HTML5 applications, so on. So what's the point of having any kind of toolkit like Qt 5? Because you have the additional layer you need to fight with, and why just not create direct bindings for all the old devices, drivers, and APIs to JavaScript?
Exactly. The question was, it seems like we're building an HTML5 platform, and we're mentioning Qt and other toolkits, and why bother with those toolkits that just adds an extra layer since we're basically only need the HTML5. And you're right, this is actually a problem, and we want to get rid of this. We started this basically because two reasons. One, we were working with the community, and they're familiar with Qt, the KDE guys, and so that's how we got started with the WebKit integration, because there was partially in PlasmaActive, it does support Qt apps and QML apps, so there had to be this Qt side. But me personally, as an architect from Basiscom, I'm focusing on the HTML5 side, and I'm trying to see, using this platform that they had, PlasmaActive, how I could do the HTML5. And my next step is to get rid of having any kind of toolkit And this is exactly, we were talking earlier about the boot to gecko, like this kind of approach where you could have an environment which you're not tied to GTK or Qt or Cocoa or some UI toolkit, that you could just have a pure HTML5 environment. And you're right, that's the direction I want to go, to get rid of that extra layer. And we're just not ready for that. And we're looking to do that. And if you guys have some ideas about moving forward on that, I'm really willing to listen, because this is exactly the target, because the whole goal is to get this very small embedded device, very streamlined, just a basic Linux environment, something like Angstrom or something very simple. Put this, the HTML5 rendering, the engine on top with the support for like power management, stuff like that, and that's it, you know, nothing more than that. But we couldn't do that yet because we couldn't find any, we haven't found any platform that would support that. But they're coming, they're coming. Any other questions? Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about your reasoning for choosing WAC as opposed to maybe a specification that's been developed in a more public manner, like the Mozilla Web Apps?
Yeah, that was, again, that requirement wasn't mine. It was a customer requirement. So that came from Samsung and LG. But yeah, you're right. We probably would have, I mean, personally, I never even heard of WAC before the project started. This was just over a year ago. Yeah, that's where the requirement, so it's not something I personally would have chose. You're right, I would have rather looked at something more open, but this came in from a customer, and actually there's at least another customer that's interested in this that's not from the ones I mentioned. But so yeah, that's the only reason. I mean, I personally don't think WAC's ready. Like I mentioned, it's more like a bunch of people came together and has an idea and say, okay, let's do this, and then they don't really have a plan, and now they're building the plan. And so the plan was, they didn't really have a plan before in the sense of technical architecture, I would say. I think it was kind of very high level, top-down kind of approach, and they're just now actually starting to build the APIs. So yeah, you're right. It probably should have been done by something else more open. I agree. Any other questions? Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, the PCAP has an Intel N450 processor, which should have been pretty fast compared to the ARM stuff. I'm just surprised what you got.
Yeah, well, the reason was that I think the WeTab problem that we had, I'm not sure it was so much of the processor. What was the problem? Because the tablets we had were really old, and I think there's a newer versions of the WeTab tablets that were okay, but we had like the first ones that were donated by Intel at the MeeGo conference, and they were rather old. And I think they still had an N450 processor though, but I'm not sure about if there were memory limitations, if there were just bugs. It's on the wiki page, all the specs and what problems we ran into, but off the top of my head, I think the WeTab were hitting a CPU, they were CPU bound as well, but I think there was another Atom-based tablet. It was a netbook, it wasn't the tablet, and it was fine, but I think it was a 270 processor. I don't think it was a 450. I think it was the one with the integrated graphics chip. And that one was okay, but the N450 was a problem. So it might have been around the graphics driver or something. I'm not sure. But the ARM, yeah, the ARM isn't blowing anybody away, because the problem with the ARM side is that we've had driver problems on ARM side. So it's not like the ARM was so much better than the Intel. I think they both have problems. I think we just had a little bit better support on the ARM side. So whenever we had problems, somebody could fix them. On the Intel side, we were struggling to get things fixed. Oh, well, on the demo, I had the WAC applets I was going to show. Then basically just show the PlasmaActive in general. And then the other thing I was going to show was some of the performance. We have one little application that we created that shows some of the performance benchmarks on the tablet. But I mean, if you have, I mean, you can show your tablet the WAC applications that you can get from, you can download them directly from the WAC website and just install them. You just need to open a console, run something like Plasma add, I think of the Plasma package -t WAC, and then the name of the tablet, the name of the widget, and you can install it, and then it shows up in the widget gallery, and then you can just play around. All this is on the website. I can show you the website. So I think it's actually the PlasmaActive.org website.
Well, if you're going to end now, I'd be happy to, for the people who are interested, we can just crowd around and pimp my tablet.
That would be great. I mean, because I don't have a hardware. I mean, if nobody else has any more questions, if there are any more questions, yeah.
So this project sounds somewhat similar in concept to what WebOS was trying to do.
Exactly.
Now that that is open source, do you think that there is a possibility for cross-pollination between the two projects?
Actually, that's a good point. Yesterday, I was actually, unofficially, day before yesterday, I was at the HP Palm site talking to one of the directors there about what's the plans on WebOS. And yeah, I'm personally really interested in moving because I personally like WebOS. And I think in some ways it's a lot more stable, but there's a lot of stuff there that probably also needs to get rid of. It's also a little heavy as far as architecture. But yeah, I would like to see those teams maybe work together. It would be nice if there's some friendly competition, but if it's not, otherwise if they merge or whatever, it's just a community effort on both. So it would be nice to see, how that goes forward. But definitely, I'm keeping an eye on that as well. So that's true. Yep.
So you haven't really got the acceleration working properly. Which bits are missing? Is it OpenGL supported?
I think most of it was OpenGL support, but I remember, I'm sorry my memory's not the best and I'm probably mixing things up, but I think that at least for the Archos tablet, there was a OpenGL issue, and then it was fixed, I think. And I think the only issue I know of performance-wide is some memory leaks in PlasmaActive. So I think most of the hardware adaptation problems have been solved, but I think there's still some memory leaks and issues with PlasmaActive now. I think that's the current state.
Part of the problem might also be related to the fact that it's layered on top of X11.
Yeah, still. Exactly, that's true. So there, and that's the thing that, all of us here and the community in general, I think things have changed and we need to, and I think we all know this as far as the desktop and mobile platforms, that whether you want to say the desktop is dead or not, I'm not going to get into that debate, but we really need to rethink the way we actually display our graphics and the way we use OpenGL and the desktop environment in general. I think we have to, because that is a big issue in general. I think there's a lot of problems and a lot of overlaying, a lot of inefficiencies. So.
Comment, major missing bit from OpenGL drivers is basically this texture upload problem and some extensions like texture walk or similar, which helps you to upload or render data.
So I'm sorry, what was it? I was going to try to repeat the question, because they're taping it. So.
Whenever you render web stuff or HTML into hardware accelerated framework, you need most of the time to upload or render data into texture. And so most of open or kind of open drivers are not missing this piece, which allow you to do it efficiently and fast.
Okay. So it wasn't really a question, it was a statement that some of the problems that we're having on the open source drivers is
It's not open source. For example, takes this SGX minor globe or the MeeGo port.
So you just say they're just not as efficient.
This extension, and basically, whenever you need to render anything into the texture, you will have this slow text to the image.
Okay. Yeah, and there's nothing, and if that's some
That's
problem.
slow down.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Not sure. I really got follow that, but okay. Any other questions?